Hello, everybody. Once again, welcome to Jury Scare, where we demystify legal issues. We want to remind you, as usual, to go to our YouTube channel, Zero Gen TV, and subscribe. And when you subscribe, click on the notification button so that you can be notified whenever we broadcast. For some time now, we've been getting a lot of questions from our viewers and our audience on issues bordering on tenancy. It appears a lot of people are concerned to know their rights both as tenants or even as lessors or landlords to property. So we want to talk this time, we want to spend some time and talk about landlord and tenants, or the broad issues of tenancy. The place to start from is for us to understand that tenancy relationships are regulated by law. So it's not a free-for-all, all-comers affair. It's not an extempore thing where because you lease your house to somebody, then the person becomes your vassal, and it's not an issue because you rented a property, then the property becomes your own to deal with as you like. Without recourse to the reversionary rights of the landlord. So there are covenants, basically, which of course are incorporated into most tenancy agreements. Of course, the funny thing is that most people lease or rent property without perfecting a formal tenancy agreement. So along the line, there is a lot of confusion, a lot of obscurity as to the terms of the relationship. So basically, there are covenants, even when there is no written tenancy agreement, as it were. There are covenants under the common law that are recognized as applicable between the landlord and his tenants. There are some duties that the landlord owes the tenant, and some duties that the tenant owes the landlord. Some of these covenants, the prominent ones, which we want to talk about now, and which from the questions we are getting will be useful to our audience, our fans, and our viewers. One of them is a covenant for the landlord to grant quiet possession to the tenant. Experience has shown that oftentimes some landlords, even after they have rented or leased their premises to a tenant, become something of a nuisance. They feel it's their right to barge into the tenant's property at any time. It's their right to, especially if they are living on the same building, it's their right to interfere with water supply. It's their right to interfere with electricity supply of the tenant, depending on their disposition towards the tenant. That ought not to be so. There is an implied covenant that the landlord is to guarantee that the tenant enjoys possession, quiet possession of his property. And that brings us to some fundamental terms. For instance, if as a tenant, I lease your building and you're a landlord, and you tell me there is water, there is electricity on this premise, and that forms the subject matter of the agreement, and I move in, and then due to your own failure to perform, there is no water, there's no electricity in the building, you as a landlord are clearly in breach of that covenant, because the property, the subject matter that is subject of the contract is not what is longer obtainable. So that's one of the areas that as a tenant you have to be sure to you have to ensure that what you're getting is what you bargain for in a property. If you are not granted quiet possession of the exact nature of property you bargain for, it is within your rights to sue and, of course, to recover damages. or get the appropriate relief from the court of law. Another interesting covenant is the covenant not to sublet. So, except it is specifically agreed in the tenancy contract, it is not right, it is wrong for a tenant to enter into a premise and then sublet it to another person without the consent of the landlord, or to bring in people who constitute of a nuisance either to the landlord or to other users of the property, or to fail to pay rent as at when due. So these are some of the covenants on the part of the tenant that the tenant is expected to keep to. Some of the terms of the contract that the tenant is expected to keep to. Now, what happens, like I give an example where the landlord has failed, maybe you move into a property, there was supposed to be water on the property, suddenly maybe one day he wakes up one morning and he feels you didn't greet him, or he doesn't like your face, or he doesn't want you on the property anymore. Instead of waiting for the due expiration of tenancy, he shuts off the water pump, or he removes the meter. This sort of behaviors amount to what is referred to as self-help, and it is punishable under the law. It is frowned at by the recovery of premises and residential premises law of Lagos State. These actions are not encouraged. Any form of resort to self-help, either by the landlord, especially in this case by the landlord, to evict a tenant from his property, is found at. A tenant, if a landlord wants a tenant to leave his property, the law provides that there are procedures to be followed. Of course, there is a procedure for recovery of premises. From the basic one, which is that you must give due and valid notice to the tenant. And of course, we know that most tenancies are yearly tenancies. So when it's a yearly tenancy, under the law, the tenant is entitled to at least 6 months notice. 6 months notice. Now, note that this 6 months notice must not expire before the end of the tenancy. So if your tenancy is supposed to expire in, let's say, 31st of August, the 6 months notice cannot come from, let's say, May. It cannot come from, let's say, January and then end in June or July, before your tenancy, which expires in August. It might exceed the end of your tenancy, but it cannot end because you must still complete your tenancy under the law. But just have in mind that you're entitled to 6 months notice. Now, another interesting question that we've been asked is, if you vacate a property, are you automatically exempted from paying rent for the time you stayed over? The answer is no. So if your tenancy ends in August and you stay 3 months extra and you eventually vacate the property, you are actually supposed to pay the arrears of that extra 3 months, which is referred to as mean profits. So that's another point that I want to denote here from the inquiries you are getting. Also, it's very important, especially when there has been a tenancy that was for 1 year certain, for the landlord and the tenant to determine the commencement of the subsequent tenancy where the tenant continues in the property. So if, for instance, you enter the property and the tenancy was supposed to last from, let's say, February 2021 to January 2022, and it was 1 year certain, and then after that you decide maybe to renegotiate with the landlord that you still want to continue to stay on the property, and he allows it, and then you pay your next rent, say in March, except it is expressly agreed that the tenancy is taken to commence from the same January as the last one. This new tenancy starts from March. So these are the things that you must be careful to note, so that when you're giving notice, you'll be able to decide whether the notice is valid or not. Another important point that we want to make is that if you are a tenant on a property and that property is sold, because the property is sold, does not mean that your tenancy is automatically terminated. Whoever buys a property buys with encumbrances, the encumbrance of your tenancy upon it, and most respect your tenancy. So in a case where you find tenants on the property and somebody buys the property and then he feels that he can just come and throw out the tenants, that is against the law. That is against the residential premises law of Lagos State. And the person who buys such property must allow the tenants to live out their tenancy according to the tenancy contract. But having said all this, remember, like I said, if you've rented out your property to somebody and you feel you want the person to leave, please make sure you follow the proper procedures. Resort to self-help may be counterproductive and may actually put you on the wrong side of the law. So I hope we've been able to clarify some of your questions as regarding your tenancy. Until we see next time, stay blessed.